UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has kicked off COP27 in Egypt, calling for immediate action to tackle climate change.
After weeks of Russian strikes on critical Ukrainian infrastructure, the US, Spain and Norway agreed to send new air defense systems to Kyiv.
Rescue charity ships are refusing to leave a port in Sicily until all migrants have disembarked in a standoff with Italy's new far-right government.
11 cities, including Paris and Barcelona, are calling for only zero-emission buses to be sold in Europe after 2027.
COP27 has started in Egypt amidst a backdrop of the war in Ukraine, high inflation, food and energy shortages, and worsening climate-related disasters. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was one of the voices to kick off the event, and he urged immediate action.
To invite the Secretary General of the United Nations.
We cannot accept that our attention is not focused on climate change. We must, of course, work together to support peace efforts and end the tremendous suffering. But climate change is on a different timeline and a different scale. It is a defining issue of our age. It is the central challenge of our century. It is unacceptable, outrageous and self-defeating to put it on the back burner. Indeed, many of today's conflicts are linked with growing climate chaos. And the war in Ukraine has exposed the profound risks of our fossil fuel addiction.
At least 40,000 people are expected to attend the UN's climate conference, but the heads of key polluters, such as China and India, are not expected to be among them. US President Joe Biden is also expected to come late, days after other major world leaders will be at the event. The conference has also been followed by controversy, as Human Rights Watch says that dozens of activists have already been arrested. And elsewhere in Europe, climate activists have ramped up protests, putting pressure on their leaders to do more to avert worsening climate disasters.
A total of 110 world leaders are here in Sharm el-Sheikh for the COP27 Climate Summit, and they're all under immense pressure to take action. That's not just from opposition parties, from voters, from campaign groups and civil society, but also from scientists who say it's not a question of time is running out, it's a question of time has run out. I spoke to Johan Rockström, the director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, one of the world's leading climate scientists. Here's what he had to say.
The decisions we take now will have impacts for centuries to come. I mean, past 1.5 and the melting of the Greenland ice sheet won't happen overnight, but it's irreversible, even if it takes 500 years, 7 meters sea level rise. With regards to the possibilities of backing down, the only option we have is to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So there's some dampening opportunity that we have if we work with nature, if we build carbon stocks and build up stocks, particularly on intact nature on land and through agricultural systems, for example. But there's no magic fixes, there's no magic wand that could take us suddenly to kind of turn off the warming that we've caused.
There is indeed no magic wand, but what there is money, and here a lot of the conversations will be about finance, from the richer countries to the poorer countries, from those who cause climate change to those most affected by it, in order to help with adaptation, because as we know, the changes are underway now and people need help to cope with this warming planet that we have. Jeremy Wilkes at COP27 in Egypt for Euronews.
Kyiv has received new air defense systems from the US, Spain and Norway to help counter Russian bombing of Ukraine's critical infrastructure. The strikes have taken a major toll. Kyiv's mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, recently told the capital's residents to prepare for a winter with no heat, water or power. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal has reported that the American National Security Advisor has held talks with top Russian officials on de-escalation in Ukraine, something Moscow hasn't confirmed.
We have nothing to say about this publication. Anglo-Saxon newspapers publish a lot of falsehoods. We have repeatedly said that the Russian side remains open to achieving its goals through negotiations. We have also repeatedly drawn everyone's attention to the fact that at the moment we do not see such a possibility, because Kyiv has adopted a law not to continue any negotiations with the Russian side.
According to Ukraine's energy minister, 30 to 40% of the country's energy infrastructure has been hit by Russia. When night comes, Ukrainians have now become used to living in darkness. Life by candlelight, which they hope can be improved by the arrival of new air defense systems.
This Ukrainian border guard scans the horizon to the border with Russia and Belarus, just a few kilometers north. This is where Russia's 90th Armored Division swept in when the war started on February 24th.
All this time we are here. Our main goal is to prevent a new invasion. But if it happens again in this area, then we are ready to stop the enemy at the state borderline, to prevent them from advancing deep into our country.
In early April, Russian troops pulled back from the north to refocus on their campaign in eastern and southern Ukraine. Since then, Kyiv has been watching the border like a hawk, especially since Belarus began serving as a rear base for Moscow's forces.
Of course, there is such a threat, because the situation in Belarus is unpredictable. There are Russian troops there. We know that. The behavior of the Belarusian leadership is completely incomprehensible.
Some 30 kilometers away lies Gorodnia, the first town occupied by the Russians on the first morning of the invasion. Grocery shop owner Svetlana dismisses the idea that Belarus could ever attack.
We live on the border. We are brotherly nations. I have a brother in Belarus and a sister in Moscow. I can't really believe that these are three fraternal people on different sides. Of course, I want everything to end as soon as possible.
Although Minsk hasn't joined the fighting, Ukraine's military says the threat of a renewed offensive is something it cannot afford to ignore. Two migrant rescue charity ships are refusing to leave a Sicilian port after the Italian government blocked some migrants from disembarking, part of the directives of the country's new far-right government. The European Commission recalled on Monday the legal and moral obligation of the member states to save the lives of people in danger at sea. The German Foreign Ministry spokeswoman said that her government is in close contact with both the Italian authorities and civil society organizations to try to end the standoff.
Civilian maritime rescue must not be hindered. It's our moral and legal obligation not to let people drown at sea.
The new Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has promised to crack down on migrants traveling across the Mediterranean. Italy is one of the main entry points into Europe, and since the start of the year, 85,000 migrants have arrived on boats, according to the UN. Currently, only children and people with medical issues are allowed to disembark the ships.
U.S. President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump are on the campaign trail ahead of their country's critical midterm election on Tuesday, which will be the United States' first national election since the infamous Capitol Hill riots almost 2 years ago, the legacy of which has hung over the country ever since.
With these election deniers, there are only two outcomes for any election. Either they win or they were cheated. No, I'm serious. Think about it. But let me tell you something. You can't only love the country when you win.
While Biden was in New York, Trump was in Miami, Florida, where he alluded to a possible run for re-election in the 2024 presidential race, a campaign that he's widely expected to launch this month.
In order to make our country successful, safe, and glorious, I will probably have to do it again, but stay tuned.
The results of Tuesday's election could dramatically impact the last 2 years of Biden's presidency and how Washington responds to issues such as abortion rights, rising economic turmoil, in the war in Ukraine.